Does the thought of church politics make you queasy? We've got the remedy today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I am joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. Welcome to the podcast. It's been a couple weeks since we've been together on the podcast, and it's good to be back with you.
It is good to be back. Always enjoy the dynamic duo format.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of dynamic duos and relationships and people, today we're talking about church politics, everybody's least favorite topic, I think, but an important one, I think, to talk about how we can manage it. So maybe that's the best way, AJ, to start this conversation, is to recognize that politics in church do exist, and they are, to some degree, inevitable.
It's kind of an elephant in the room topic, isn't it? Because there's no way anybody's listening that says you cannot either say today it doesn't exist in your church or that you've never experienced it in church. I mean, this is one of those 100% participation topics.
Yeah, and in fact, before this episode, before we hit record on this, I was sharing with you a definition of politics, and there's several definitions, like a lot of words, but one of the definitions is the total complex of relations between people living in society. And the etymology of it, the word politics, actually just comes from a Greek word that means public matters or civic affairs, or of citizens civic, of a state political public. It's just this idea of people. You get people in a room, and there are going to be these complex systems of power and relationship, and it's a part of the human condition. In fact, I would argue that politics exists even in your home, about everything from big decisions about whether or not to take a job or to move somewhere or to have kids or when to have kids, to small decisions like what are we eating for dinner tonight.
That's right. Yeah. Every time we get in the car to choose a restaurant together, there's now and the politics change. Sometimes the leadership are more open to the input from those being led, and sometimes the leadership is not. They're more interested in making the decision unilaterally.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And so I think it's worth just acknowledging on the front end that politics themselves are not, they're amoral. They're not good or bad. They're the reality. They're the you are a fish, and it is the water that you swim in when you are a leader in the church. So it's best to just accept that reality, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because acceptance of that reality brings awareness, keeps it in mind, and dealing with people, managing relationships is what good leadership is about. And keeping this in mind, that it exists, and being a good leader that can manage those relationships, manage expectations, and also, manage input at varying levels is what makes it work out for the best for everybody and not cause tension and disruption.
Yeah. And so maybe it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when I hear church leaders say, "Oh, I hate church politics." Well, okay. Congratulations, I guess. I don't know what to say to that. I mean, you have to learn how to navigate them, because it's just a part of it. And so if you hate church politics, you shouldn't be in church leadership.
That statement is probably more so I hate conflict.
Right. That's fair. Yeah, and it's okay to hate conflict, but even conflict itself is not necessary. You can have healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict. It's okay to hate bad politics or unhealthy politics in the church. That's fine. Even just take 1 second and sort of step out in society, and not just about church when we talk about politics as it relates to government. politics as it relates to government isn't necessarily good or bad,
Yeah.
but polarized politics can be bad.
Yeah.
That polarization is really bad and negative. But the fact that there is politics is inevitable for human society. And so it's not good to hate politics. Just it's best to learn how to manage and navigate that, which is the point today on
That's
the
right.
podcast. We have 5 tips for that.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and jump in, Scott. Our first tip is discerning God's vision and direction for your church. And so what we're speaking of here is putting what God would like your church to do above what you as one leader or a group of leaders or an entire church want to put forth on your own and then inevitably argue about.
Yeah, you really got to have first principles as it relates to your church and where it's going. So that starts obviously with a Great Commission mission and defining discipleship through the lens of Scripture. And at the Malphurs Group, we look at Acts chapter 2 as a good description of a healthy discipleship culture. So we have these ends in mind, these goals in mind, and then ultimately that is capped off with a clear vision for where God is leading your church. And as you were saying, AJ, this is not your personal vision for the church. This is not your goals, your dreams. This is something that comes from the Lord and is shared by the leadership in the church. And so healthy politics in a church starts with, who is our frame of reference? Is it me and my thing? Or is it the Lord and where he's leading us? And if you want to manage the politics, you have to get the first things first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the difference in the perspective is, here's what I think versus here's what I think God, would like us to do or is calling us to do.
Right.
And, God, though, I mean, we have to acknowledge he's empowered us with intellect and knowledge and experience, and all those things play in. But in the end, we're talking about the church, and this is again one of those pieces that you get into that divides the church from like business or other organizations or other things that we experience in life. And so calling upon the Lord first, and having a group of leaders that do that together collectively, then that's the difference in healthy politics and unhealthy politics. Seeking the Lord first, and then working out the details that God will always lay before us to work out, is where we want to be, and not just a collection of people saying, well, here's my idea and let's debate it against your idea.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a question that comes up for us in strategic envisioning and the work we do at the Malphurs Group from time to time, is this idea of like, well, we have differing ideas. How can we move forward as a church? And we'll often tell churches the actual process of discerning God's will and God's vision for your church together, it is the unifying work. It's doing the work together is the thing that draws us together. Sitting around and talking about how we feel very often is not something that draws us together. Sitting around and chasing after what it is that God is trying to tell us and discerning that together prayerfully and proactively, that does generate unity of direction for the majority of people. We'll talk about the outliers here later, but for the majority of people, that does create a sense of unity. So that's tip number 1, is start with the first things, which is discerning God's vision, which is, of course, rooted in the mission that we share to make mature disciples, and the culture that we ought to all be striving for in churches, which is a healthy discipleship culture.
Yep, absolutely. Defining the big items first. Our second one is determine which stakeholders are essential for driving the ministry forward. And so this one right here might be a little touchy now for some people, because we're starting to make some divisions, Scott, I suppose, of who's really an active participant, necessary participants, influential participants, versus those who maybe are not, usually by choice. I mean, there's always, the church is a pyramid shape in which fewer people are involved in leadership decision making, but also fewer people are even interested in leadership decision making, depending on the topic, because sometimes the bottom of the pyramid all of a sudden says, well, hold on, that's not what we're all interested in. But for the most part, it is fewer people. And I think that's a missed point sometimes in decision making by leaders who fear, what the group or groups might think, when in fact, really a lot of people don't care and aren't really that interested. And leaders sometimes forget that. But we do have to determine the stakeholders. I mean, who really are the people that we need to initiate discussion with and bring in earlier stages to start talking about moving forward in a decision.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about this, I think, as we move in, especially to the next point. But this is maybe the aspect of politics, church politics, that people don't like, is this idea, or even just politics in general, this idea of, hey, you kind of got to glad hand certain people in order to get what you want or to effectuate change. And I can understand why some people don't like that, or why that can be frustrating at times. I really do understand it. At the same time, it's part of it. Part of it is understanding that there are certain people you need to bring along. The mistake that I think there are two extremes. On the one hand, you have the pastor or leader or board who thinks, we'll just do whatever we want, and come hell or high water, people are going to get on the bus or they're not. And what ends up happening is they just bulldoze a whole bunch of people and create a lot of emotional carnage behind them. And the worst case scenario is not that someone would leave your church, but it's that they would leave the church and go, well, I've given up on church because of this experience that happened to me.
Yeah.
On the other extreme are the pastors who think, I have to win everyone over. I got to get everybody on board. I got to get everybody on the bus with me in order to move forward. And that's just not true. The happy balance is figuring out specifically which stakeholders are essential for driving the ministry forward, and how can I win them over? How can I win over these key groups of folks, and get enough, go for ownership versus buy-in. So don't try to sell them something that they have to buy, but include them in the process, going back to step one in discerning God's vision, but giving them some ownership in that process so that they're advocating for the change or for the direction alongside you. So the more that you can include, and even if you have to take a slightly slower pace, I mean, it just was recently, I was working with the church somewhere, and it's really important that in order for one of the key changes that's happening at this church is that the staff get on board. If we don't have the staff, and in this instance, it's got to be basically the whole staff, the church isn't going to move the direction it needs to move. And so, even as a consultant and working with them, I intentionally made the decision to slow down our process with them, adjust the timeline and adjust the pacing so that we're more likely to get them to move along. Because I'd rather them move at a slower pace and come with than to push them, to drive them, and ultimately drive them away. So it takes a bit of emotional intelligence, I think, AJ, to be able to read the room, read the context, read the people. And this is going to be a constant theme. Not abandon the direction, but work with the people context that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately there's a lot of leaders that they don't think that way, or they're not able to, kind of play the long game on some things. And it's a valuable skill to learn to think more strategically about decision making long term, and manage those, again, like I said at the top of the show, manage those relationships. And nothing that we're saying here, it's a lot of strategy. It's kind of like relationship strategy, but nothing we're saying here is intended at all for manipulation,
No.
or, coercion. We're talking about like genuine leadership relationships and team building, and And well, let's move on to our
Yeah.
point
Oh,
number
well,
three,
hold on.
Scott.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is a good segue, but also AJ, to your point, you're not, let's take it back to the basic unit, like family. You're not building a good relationship with your wife so that she'll eat Mexican food when you want. Like, that's not the reason why. But if you have a good relationship with your wife, when you really have a craving for Mexican food, you're more likely to be able to convince her, hey, let's have Mexican food.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you didn't, that's not the motivation for why you form a good relationship with her, but it is a byproduct of having a good relationship with her, is that you can, have more influence in those kinds of decisions.
There you go. And an aspect of that, our point for number three, is to be winsome as a leader. And this is not a word that you hear very often in everyday conversation.
Nope.
I think it's kind of gotten lost, and I think it's a really interesting art and skill, and I think a really interesting virtue. And to personally desire that, to be winsome, and you hear it talked about a lot in evangelism, in just sharing the gospel, to be attractive to people in a genuine way. And I think that's a really great quality in a leader. And it's one that people are attracted to. I think whenever you get to know somebody like that personality that kind of draws you in, that's why, you see, no, unfortunately it can be faked. And that's why you see a lot of like really unhealthy leaders with large followings, and then the wheels come off at some point. But I think with integrity, winsomeness with integrity, and people's best interests in mind, I think is a really, really amazing quality in a leader.
Yeah, apparently this has become the dictionary episode, but the definition of winsome is that it would be something that's generally pleasing, often because of a childlike charm and innocence. And so it should come across, when a child is charming, it's generally not manipulative, right? It's genuine.
Yeah.
And a second definition, I think equally important, is this idea of being cheerful or lighthearted. There's so much pessimism in leadership today, and I'm guilty of this, like to always go to the negative and harp on something negative, or to criticize or be critical. There's such a critical spirit in our society that it does make a difference when you're lighthearted and optimistic and positive. And saying the best in someone or in a situation, that does attract people. Have you taken the Strengths Finder before?
Yeah.
One of the 30, I think it's 32.
What the results were.
That's right. Well, I think one of the 30, I think it's 32 strengths themes is woo.
You're right.
Which stands for winning others over. Like, it's, some people have a natural gift for that, but there's, all of us that are in leadership needs to have, to some degree, even if it's not an innate quality that we have, this ability to win others over, to be winsome. It's positive. I mean, it's so important. And so if you look at your own leadership and you're always negative, you're always critical, you're always down, you're always pessimistic, or I don't think that's going to work, you got to take a step back, I think, and go, I got to be winsome. If you want to convince someone to do something, you can't just tell them why the thing you were doing was so terrible and bad. It just doesn't work. You've really got to win others over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, the opposite of winsome is more popular today than it seems ever. There's so much divisiveness, as you said. I think it would be a really, really attractive and refreshing quality in somebody, in a leader. And so, you know what, now is the time to be winsome more than ever, because you don't see it happening much out in the world.
Here's interesting. So like, you think about Jesus speaking to Peter, kind of casting a vision for Peter. When he names him Peter, he says, you are Petros, rock, Peter. and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, which is an offensive move. This is the idea that the church would be on the move, and that the gates of hell, which are meant to hold back the light, will not be able to prevail against the light of the gospel coming forward. We often read that as like a defensive posture, but
Yeah,
the
you're right.
gates are the gates of hell that are trying to hold back the light. And so Jesus is casting vision for and trying to be winsome with a guy that he is underhandedly calling the Rock, and also Rocky, because he understands his character to be a little bit hard in certain aspects, I think. And so, I don't know, look at the way that Jesus led. He didn't shy away from saying the hard things or being critical. At the same time, he was also clearly very winsome in winning others over.
Yeah, good one. All right, our next one is to not tolerate sinful behavior. So, and there's so much pushback and potential ways that people might push back on things or go against what maybe a decision has been. I think sometimes leaders miss that somebody's behavior has maybe crossed a line, and we let things go on that shouldn't go on. And I
we
think
blame it on personality.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just their personality.
Yeah, which is really weird, isn't it? That we would kind of that we would show that much grace, I suppose. There's a point in which you need to say you're abrasive, or you've really been holding things back, or but sometimes it goes beyond that. I mean, yes, not everybody's personality is winsome. And we do need to show grace to people and be friends, but sometimes gossip and misinformation and underhandedness goes beyond that. It goes into calculated action, and so which might be kind of the defining point, between they come across gruff or they're argumentative, but when they begin to calculate on maintaining their own power or undermining yours, that's when a line's been crossed. And that's when leadership in the church, and hopefully it's not just one person, hopefully it's a united leadership front, needs to address that and not tolerate it.
Yeah, I think that, you had asked, maybe we need to come up with a specific example here. So I'll just share one from my personal experience in ministry. I had a situation where we had a policy at a church that I worked on staff at, that we weren't going to announce certain things from the stage on a Sunday morning. And on that list of things that we weren't going to announce was baby showers. It just, especially when you're in a growing church with young families, if you're going to announce baby showers, you're going to be announcing one, certainly every month, if not every week, just about, You're
just tightening up your communication policy.
Just tightening up the communication policy. Now, is it fair to disagree with the policy? Sure. Could we communicate our communication policy differently or better? Absolutely. All of that's on the table. Disagreement, totally fine. But we had an individual in the church who, she was upset that this was the policy, and so
this was a staff decision, person, right?
No.
Oh, just somebody in the church
member. Yeah.
Okay.
She decided she was a leader in the church, but not a staff person.
Okay.
She decided to get some sticky notes and write about a baby shower that was coming up that particular Sunday, and she went around the whole facility and started placing, it had to have been 10 or 15 different handmade signs that she had made all around the building with this announcement about this baby shower. And that crossed a line at that point. So disagreement about the policy, fine. Discussion about how we could handle it differently, all that's good. Not a problem. But that's insubordination when you're doing that just to make a point. It's not a good look. And so we had to confront that. We had to confront her, and we had to have a really tough and awkward and hard conversation. But you cannot tolerate things like that. Otherwise, you're going to just see more and more of it.
Yeah.
Proverbs 6:19 says that, of the things that God hates, I think there's 7. One of the things that God hates is one who spreads discord among brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to, a false witness, one who sows discord among brethren. We cannot tolerate these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And sometimes that stuff, it goes on a little too long.
Yep.
And sort of related to that, our last point for today, number 5, be flexible on process, but unrelenting on principle. And so, the process or strategy that's the time for, discussion. And that's where we have freedom to develop ideas and to debate. But they always need to be rooted or grounded in things that are unchanging and things, intolerable positions of change. So this is where we get lots of freedom, and we can express things differently, and we can come up with ideas together. But we can't let politics of the church get into things that affect, our undergirding principles.
Yeah, totally. I think that it's important to be humble. You can have a conviction about direction and believe that God is leading our church this way or that way, and you can be unrelenting in your understanding of where God is leading the church as a general sense. But the specifics of how you're going to get from here to there, you've got to be humble on those things. I've got a church that I'm working with right now. They had a particular initiative that, to be quite honest, I was skeptical that it was going to work. I've just seen enough of these things, and I thought, I really don't think this is going to work. But I said, go ahead and move forward with it. I didn't make a big stink about it. It's just go ahead and move forward with it and measure how well it works. What are the results? And AJ, the results of it were fantastic. I mean, it did. I don't know that it could have gone much better than it did go. I still have questions about, will it be repeatable and things like that. So I mean, here I am still maybe a little bit doubting, but and I recognize that I'm just a consultant in relationship to them, and it's ultimately their decision. But I could have made a stink about it and been like, definitely don't do this. It's for sure not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But you really ought not be that way. You really ought to be flexible and humble and recognize that God is speaking to other people too.
Yeah.
And so while you don't need to be flexible on the vision, you can be intractable on that and go, this is where God is calling us. Be humble enough to hear other people's ideas on how to get there.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's one of those winsome qualities from point 3 that will pay off later in your leadership dividends, for sure.
Definitely. Yep, for sure. So navigating politics in the church, AJ, it's not an easy thing, but it's a necessary thing. And if you spend your whole ministry trying to avoid politics, you're going to shortchange your ministry. You should instead just go, nope, this is the water that we swim in. And so I ought to just learn how to become good at this, not for manipulative reasons, but genuinely create good relationships so that you can build goodwill, so that you can leverage that goodwill in key moments. I think marriage is a great example of this. You don't do nice things for your wife just so that she'll do, follow all your ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That's not why you do it. If it is, that's probably not a very good marriage, right? But if you do build a good relationship with your spouse, a result of that is you're going to be able to, apply some leverage when you go, no, I really have a strong conviction about this. Can we do this? Can we move forward in this? And vice versa. She's going to be able to influence you and go, I think you're right. And finding that relationship and that balance and the ability to work together, at the end of the day, that's what ministry is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about the sermons that you preach, the prayers that you pray, the hospital visits. It's about people and managing relationships. And that's what politics is. So
Yeah.
lean into it. Don't run away from it.
Good idea. Good word. Thanks for being with us. This has been episode 114 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. And you could read this week's article at malfersgroup.com/114. And we'd also love you to go over there to the YouTube channel for the Malfers Group, where you can see the video version of this episode. And there's a few discussion questions for your team down in the description below. While you're there, subscribe, hit the bell, give it a like and a share, and definitely pass this on to others in ministry, because we would love to have them with us. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for joining us.